So now we've reached the final stage for our watercolor paintings, in which we're going to put in those really fine details. Up to this point, we've been using a lot of the wet on wet technique, in which we've used water on the page and dropped color into it and let it spread on its own and kind of manipulated it in small, almost puddles. This is really nice because it creates that gradation, the variation that we expect from a watercolor painting, where we're not getting nearly as much of a brush stroke, but more of just kind of a spreading of tone. While that makes for some very interesting build-up and background areas, when it comes to that final touch, though, when we want the details, we want more control. We want a little bit of a sharper focus when we start to create focal points within our image. So in this point, we are going to switch to doing the wet on dry, in which our paintbrush is wet with the color, but the paper is going to be dry. This way, we're going to treat our paintbrush almost like a pen or a thick marker, and we're going to put in those fine little details that'll finally sharpen and focus in on the object. You really do want to think about where you want your viewer to look, too, because these sharp details are going to be very different from the kind of wild, spread, light colors that you were using before. So on my image, you can see I've built it up. I've got the tones in the various areas. I've laid in my shadows. You get a sense of where the light is coming from, where the shadows are. But now I want to put some of those finer details, the vents, some of the line work that gives us the texture of the drill. So I'm going to start by always getting those air bubbles out of my paintbrush. And on that front edge, I have the nose of the drill has some really defined lines to it. So I'm going to get a lot of tone into the paint, and then I'm going to come back, and I'm not going to put water on the paper. I'm just going to barely be touching the paper and lightly trying to put in some of those lines. Now, this is a very thick brush. If you have a thin brush, I highly recommend that for this step, as your details will end up being much finer. Than I'm able to achieve with this brush. So I'm going to give it more of a sense, as opposed to giving you 5 lines, I might give you 2 lines, just till you get a sense of what's going on there. All right, and we got those vents that we had kind of previously indicated. Put those in there. We got two up front, and the idea is, again, you're going to have much sharper areas. Give them a sense of what's going on in your image, maybe texturally. Now I am going to thin out the black a little bit, because I want the dark of the nose to be different from the silver section, but I still have some of those lines there. But I don't want them to be nearly as dark as they are on the nose. And once I lay in a little bit of tone with those lines, I can always come back in and drop a little more tone into them. So really, just looking to put those fine details into place. You're not going to be able to get all of them, but just a little something to give us some variety. A little hard-edged line to make it slightly different from the soft areas that we've previously put on here. And again, I'm not putting a lot of water on the page first. I'm gonna let those dry. I can always come back to it, look again. I go to my other painting, thinking the same things. I want to put some dark areas in there. This one's especially a little trickier because the drill is much smaller, so the detail. Again, if you have a little brush, highly recommend using a thinner brush for this. If you don't, you're like me, you're using this one, you're going to do the old artistic fudge a little bit, which is actually fine because remember, no one is looking at the object in particular and then looking at your painting and comparing. They're just going to see your painting. So if you change things a little bit, it's what we call artistic license. You always got to make some choices. Some things are going to disappear. Some things are going to reappear. But really, the idea here is we want to create some areas that got a little harder edge to them, a little sharper, to create that variety. That's what we're looking for, is a little bit of variety, a little visual interest, some areas that are going to make your viewer pop in between those sections. All right, so go ahead, look at your object, find those details that you want your viewer to see first, create a pathway through some sharp areas of color to contrast your flowing lighter areas. Good luck.